You know that specific kind of silence that happens right before a car crash? That split second where your brain registers the danger, but your body hasn't had time to react yet. That was exactly what the ballroom of the Grand Corinthian Hotel felt like the moment the cold liquid hit my skin. I was standing there, center stage in a room full of people whose net worth could buy small countries, wearing a peach silk gown that I'd spent 3 months convincing myself I deserved to wear. And suddenly the world just stopped. It wasn't rain. It wasn't a spilled drink from a clumsy waiter. It was a deliberate, heavy splash of vintage Cabernet, poured slowly, methodically right over my head by a 14-year-old boy named Julian Sterling. I can still feel the temperature of it, cold against my scalp, trickling down my neck, soaking into the fabric of a dress that cost more than my mother made in a year. And the first thing I heard wasn't a gasp of horror. It wasn't someone rushing to help me with a napkin. It was a laugh, a sharp, piercing cackle that cut through the air like broken glass. It was Julian's mother, Victoria Sterling, clapping her manicured hands together like her son had just performed a brilliant magic trick. Instead of assaulting a grown woman, a CEO, a guest of honor in their own home, oh, look at that, she squealed, phone already out. Camera lens pointed right at my humiliation. Julian always did have an eye for color. Doesn't she look better in red, Gregory? And there stood Gregory Sterling, the patriarch, the man who had spent the last 6 months begging me to merge my tech firm, Ross Dynamics, with his failing energy giant to save their legacy. Just standing there sipping his scotch, looking at me like I was a stain on his Persian rug that he'd have to pay someone to scrub out. Later, try not to drip on the marble. Elena, he said, his voice low, bored, completely devoid of humanity. These galas really aren't designed for temperamental outbursts. I stood there, wine dripping off my eyelashes, realizing that to them, I wasn't a partner. I wasn't an innovator who had built a billion-dollar clean energy grid from a garage in Detroit. I was just entertainment. I was a prop in their rich people games, someone to be tolerated until the check cleared and then discarded or destroyed for sport. Julian was smirking, that terrifying, dead-eyed smirk of a kid who has never been told no in his entire life, holding the empty crystal goblet like a trophy, waiting for me to scream, waiting for me to cry, waiting for me to give them the reaction they wanted, the angry black woman meltdown. That would validate every whisper, every side eye, every doubt they'd held about me since I walked in the door. But here's the thing about growing up where I did, about fighting tooth and nail for every inch of ground I've ever gained. You learn that silence is louder than screaming, and control is the most dangerous weapon in the room. I took a breath, tasting the tannins of the wine on my lips, and I didn't wipe my face. I didn't run away. I just looked at Julian, really looked at him. And then I looked at his parents, capturing that tableau of cruelty in my mind forever. "Thank you," I said. And my voice was so steady it scared me a little, projecting clearly to the hundreds of guests who had frozen with their champagne flutes halfway to their mouths. "You have just provided the final piece of due diligence I was missing." Gregory frowned, that arrogant mask slipping just a fraction. "What are you babbling about? Go get cleaned up. You look ridiculous." I ignored him, turning my back on the family and walking toward the podium, the wet silk clinging to my legs, leaving a trail of red droplets on the pristine white stairs. And every step I took felt like I was marching into battle. I gripped the sides of the lectern, the wine dripping onto the polished wood, and I looked out at the sea of faces, partners, investors, the press, and I didn't apologize for my appearance. I didn't make a joke to lighten the mood. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, and the room was so quiet you could hear the ice melting in the buckets. "We were here tonight to announce the merger of Ross Dynamics and Sterling Energy, a deal valued at $800 million, a deal intended to modernize this country's power grid." I paused, letting my eyes drift back to where the Sterlings were standing, Victoria's phone still recording, her smile faltering as she realized this wasn't part of the script. "However, my company operates on a core philosophy. We do not build on broken foundations, and we do not partner with toxicity." Gregory started moving through the crowd then, his face turning a violent shade of purple, pushing guests out of the way. "Cut the mic. Someone cut the damn mic." "Effective immediately," I said, my voice rising over his shouting. Ross Dynamics is withdrawing all offers, terminating all negotiations, and pulling our infrastructure support from the Sterling grid. You see, boys will be boys, but CEOs have to be adults, and I refuse to do business with children. The uproar was instantaneous. A tidal wave of noise, flashbulbs exploding like fireworks, reporters shouting questions, shareholders pulling out their phones to sell. Sell before the market opened. I walked off that stage with wine still dripping from my hem, passing Gregory Sterling as he lunged for me, only to be blocked by my head of security, a mountain of a man named Marcus, who had been waiting for a reason to step in. "You'll regret this," Gregory screamed, spit flying, the facade of the genteel billionaire completely gone, revealing the desperate, angry man beneath. "I'll bury you. You hear me? You're nothing. You're nobody." I didn't look back. I just kept walking, straight out the front doors, past the valet who looked at me with wide, terrified eyes, and into the back of my car where Marcus handed me a towel, and I finally let my hands shake. But that wasn't the end. That was just the opening shot of a war that would get so much dirtier than red wine on a silk dress. The next morning, the fallout was nuclear. Sterling Energy stock was in freefall. Their Asian markets had tanked overnight, and the video of Julian assaulting me had gone viral. Millions of views, but instead of apologizing, the Sterling PR machine went into overdrive. They released statements calling me emotionally unstable, claiming I had provoked a child, that I was using a prank to wiggle out of a contract I couldn't afford, spinning the narrative so fast it would make your head spin. I was sitting in my office, watching the pundits on TV debate whether my tone was too aggressive, when my assistant buzzed in, her voice hushed and urgent. "Ms. Ross, there's a woman in the lobby. She says she has no appointment, but she says she has the Book of Sins, and that you need to see it." I was tired. I was angry. I was ready to tell everyone to go to hell. But something about that phrase, Book of Sins, it sparked a curiosity I couldn't ignore. "Send her up." When the elevator doors opened, I expected a corporate spy or a journalist. "They think they're gods," Margaret said, her hands smoothing over the cover of the book. "They think because they pay the bills, they own the truth." But I was there, Ms. Ross. I was there when Gregory laughed about cutting corners on the safety valves for the rig in the Gulf. I was there when Victoria paid off the inspector to ignore the lead paint in the low-income housing units. I wrote it all down. Dates, times, names, account numbers. I opened the book, and my breath caught in my throat. It was meticulous, a handwritten chronicle of 3 decades of corruption, bribery, negligence, and abuse. It wasn't just mean words. This was criminal. This was the kind of stuff that puts people in federal prison for the rest of their natural lives. "Why bring this to me?" I asked, looking up at her, seeing the fear and the defiance warring in her face. "You could have gone to the police years ago." "Who listens to the help?" she whispered, a tear tracing a path through the wrinkles on her cheek. I was invisible. "But last night, when I saw you stand up there, dripping wet, humiliated, and you didn't shrink, you didn't apologize, you just told the truth. It woke me up. I realized I've been holding the gun for 30 years, but you're the one who knows how to pull the trigger." We spent the next 12 hours in a war room. My legal team, Margaret, and me, going through every page, cross-referencing her notes with public records, building a case that was so airtight it was suffocating. We found the ghost employees on the payroll used to siphon money for Julian's trust fund. We found the environmental reports they'd buried that showed their new pipeline was leaking toxic waste into groundwater. We found the emails printed and saved by Margaret where Gregory used racial slurs to describe his board members. But the Sterlings weren't done. They weren't going to go down without burning the world to ash first. Just as we were preparing to hand the dossier over to the SEC, my head of security burst into the conference room, his face pale, holding up his tablet. "Elena, you need to see this," Marcus said, his voice grim. "It's trending #1 worldwide." They didn't just spin the story, they fabricated a new one. He pressed play, and I watched, horrified, as a grainy security video filled the screen. It showed a woman who looked like me, wearing the same dress I wore that night, cornering Julian in a hallway, screaming at him, raising a hand as if to strike him, while he cowered in fear. The audio was muffled but distinct, my voice, threatening to destroy his family, threatening to hurt him. That's a deepfake, I gasped, the room spinning. I was never even alone with him. It doesn't matter, Marcus said, scrolling through the comments. The internet has already convicted you. They're calling you a child abuser. Our bank just froze our credit line. The board is calling an emergency meeting to vote on your removal as CEO. I looked at Margaret, who looked terrified, realizing the monster she was up against. The Sterlings had weaponized technology, money, and racism to paint me as a monster. And looking at the vitriol pouring across the screen, the death threats, the calls for my arrest. For the first time in my life, I didn't know if I could fight back. I felt the walls closing in, the weight of the lie crushing the truth, and I wondered if this was it, if the bad guys were actually going to win. The darkness in my office that night felt physical, a heavy, suffocating blanket that smelled of stale coffee and fear. The deepfake video was playing on a loop on the main monitor, the artificial version of me screaming at a cowering Julian Sterling, and every time it played, a little piece of my soul chipped away. Outside, I could hear the faint chanting of protesters, people who believed the lie, people who thought I was a monster who bullied children, and the strobe lights of news vans, flickering against the glass of the 30th floor like a chaotic disco. They're calling for a boycott, Marcus said, his voice low, trying to be gentle but failing because the facts were brutal. 3 major vendors just pulled out. The stock is down 40% in after-hours trading. The board wants you to resign by morning to save the company brand. They're saying if you step down, maybe the Sterlings will drop the lawsuit. I looked at Margaret Hale, sitting in the corner of the plush leather sofa, looking so small and frail, clutching her purse. She had risked everything to bring me the truth, and now it looked like we were both going to be buried by a lie. I can't resign, I whispered, standing up and walking to the window, looking down at the city that felt like it was turning its back on me. If I resign, I validate it. I admit guilt, and everything in that ledger, it disappears. The Sterlings win. They keep poisoning the water, they keep stealing wages, and they keep teaching their son that he can destroy people for sport. But Elena, Marcus argued, this video, it's good. It's military grade. Even our tech guys are having trouble proving it's a fake fast enough. By the time we prove it, the company will be dead. I turned back to the screen, staring at the fabrication. It was perfect, too perfect. The shadows, the audio, the movement. But then, something caught my eye. A tiny detail. In the video, the fake me raised her right hand to threaten Julian. I watched it again, and again. Marcus, I said, my voice sharp, zoom in. Frame for 102, the reflection. What? The reflection in the brass handle of the door behind Julian. Zoom in. He tapped the screen, expanding the image until the pixels blurred. There, curved and distorted in the polished metal of the doorknob, was the reflection of the hallway. But in the reflection, the hallway was empty. There was no Eleanor Ross. There was no Julian. There was just a green screen stand and a guy holding a boom mic. They forgot the ray tracing. I breathed, a hysterical laugh bubbling up in my chest. They spent millions on AI generation, but they missed the physics of the reflection. It's a composite. It's fake. The energy in the room shifted instantly. It went from a funeral to a war room. We have the proof, Marcus said, typing furiously. I can have a forensic report ready in an hour. No, I said, a cold resolve settling over me like armor. We're not sending a report to the board. We're not issuing a press release. The Sterlings wanted a show. They wanted a public execution. Fine, let's give them one. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for the biggest network news anchor in the country, a woman who had been trying to get an interview with me for years. This is Eleanor Ross. I want to go live. Tomorrow morning. And I'm bringing guests. The next morning, the press conference wasn't held in a stuffy hotel room. I set it up right in front of the Sterling Energy headquarters, a towering monolith of glass and steel. The wind was whipping, blowing my hair back, but I stood there in a white suit, sharp, clean, the opposite of the wine-stained mess they had made of me. Beside me stood Margaret Hale, trembling but standing tall, and behind us, a massive LED screen we had rented for the occasion. Hundreds of reporters were there, hungry for blood, expecting a resignation, a tearful apology. Julian Sterling was there too, standing with his parents off to the side, looking smug, wearing a neck brace that I knew for a fact he didn't need. "Good morning," I said, not using a teleprompter. "For the last 48 hours, you have been told a story. You've been told that a powerful woman attacked a helpless child. You've been shown a video that confirms your worst biases. But I am an engineer. I deal in facts. And the fact is, lying is expensive, but the truth is free." I nodded to Marcus. The screen behind me lit up. First, the deepfake video played. Then, the breakdown, the reflection, the forensic analysis showing the digital artifacts. The crowd gasped. I saw Gregory Sterling take a step forward, his face draining of color. "But a fake video is just a distraction," I continued, my voice gaining power. "It's a smokescreen designed to hide what the Sterlings are really afraid of. They aren't afraid of me being mean to their son. They are afraid of her." I stepped aside, and Margaret Hale stepped up to the microphone. She looked tiny against the backdrop of the skyscraper, but when she spoke, her voice rang out like a bell. "My name is Margaret," she said, "and for 30 years, I was invisible. But I saw everything, and then we unleashed the flood. We didn't just talk about it. We put the documents on the screen, the emails mocking the safety inspectors, the wire transfers hiding the embezzled funds, the blueprints showing the illegal bypasses on the pipelines. We played the audio recordings Margaret had taken